Today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Good to be with you.
Okay, good. There's a subject in the news today that I wanted to talk a little bit about. It has to do with Syria. That's been going on for a long time. You know, we've been involved probably for many, many years, but explicitly so in the last 4 years when the president announced that Assad had to go. Well, 4 years, unfortunately, we haven't lost any American lives of significance, but the American people have lost a lot of money. And right now, it seems like maybe things aren't going so well. After 4 years, Assad is still hanging on. And who knows who the enemy to Assad is? There must be several groups over there. I mean, all of a sudden, ISIS popped up and looks like the most powerful group. And of course, Iran has an interest in this, and we do. And now, all of a sudden, the neoconservatives have announced, and there was this article in the New York Review of Books representing the neoconservative view, that the neocons urge the embracing of Al-Qaeda. Now, there has to be a logic to this. It doesn't mean that the logic means it will benefit the United States and the American people. But what do you think their logic is here? Does it make any sense at all?
Well, it does in their own way of thinking. You know, there was another article by Professor Mendelsohn in Foreign Affairs magazine. It was called "Accepting Al-Qaeda, the Enemy of the United States Enemy." And I think if I understand the neocon argument, here's how it will go. It's all Obama's fault. He did not invade Syria when he had a chance in 2013 on these trumped-up charges of using chemical weapons. He didn't invade, and so therefore we're backed into a corner. ISIS is gaining ground. Assad hasn't been gotten rid of. So because of Obama, without not invading, we've now got to look for other allies in Al-Qaeda. We've got to just kind of change our minds about them. Mendelsohn said, the instability in the Middle East following the Arab revolutions and the meteoric rise of the Islamic State require Washington to rethink its policy toward Al-Qaeda.
The reason I have a problem with this is that, of course, first, I don't want us involved in that, and it's a bad policy. But they're not willing to even consider that the policy is bad. What they're saying is let's change tactics. You know, we're with one group one time and another group another time, and we have to get Saudis aboard. We have to get Israel aboard. We have to, maybe encourage the Turks to do something that would help get rid of Assad. But it's pretty amazing that so many groups have been organized and agreed all of a sudden that Assad had to go. The Assads have been around for a while, but there must have been something that precipitated this great need to get rid of Assad 4 years ago. Do you know of one particular event that it's time Assad had to go because he's a threat to the world?
I think you can actually trace this back to a document written in 1996 called A Clean Break. It was written by the neocons of the time, Richard Pearl among them. This was, as you remember, and there's an interesting article by Dan Sanchez on antiwar.com about this. But right after the horrible murder of a liberal Israeli prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, the Likud came back into power under Netanyahu in '96. The U.S. very hawkish neocons handed him this document, and here is the roadmap for Israel to dominate the Middle East. And number one on that list, we've got to get rid of Assad in Syria, because it challenges policies not just there, but toward Lebanon. And so the roadmap to get there was first going through Iraq and overthrowing Hussein, which they did, then moving on to Syria. So if you follow that, and it sounds conspiratorial, but if you follow the way that events actually happened, they have happened that way. And then you have the myth of the Arab Spring, which was a spontaneous uprising, they say, but it was really nothing of the sort.
And obviously, they don't have the people on our side, or it would have happened spontaneously by the people who live in Syria, and they don't like Assad. So that isn't the case. But we've spent some money and time, and in the last year, one of the methods had been to train, the Syrians, because all of a sudden ISIS is there. We have to train people to fight for their country, and so the president got $500 million appropriated. They started spending that money, who knows how much. And I don't think they have any troops trained. I think they're training 100. Their goal was to have 5,400 at the end of the year. So I would say that not only is the policy wrong, the tactics are a total failure, and that's why I guess they're reaching out to Al-Qaeda.
Well, they can't, they have, I think the U.S. has two dual track things. One is the overt and one is the covert. The CIA has been running the covert for a long time, and they get about $1 billion a year, and they have less compunction about training people who go on to fight with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, because the goal is to overthrow Assad and to fight ISIS. But the overt one is the one you're talking about, and it speaks volumes about the myth that it was a democratic uprising, because they can't get any moderates
yeah, that's right.
to sign up. Nobody's interested.
If there's any uprising, they've gone with ISIS, is the whole thing. ISIS has 20,000 troops, and they're very determined, they're well motivated, and potentially they have even more than that, or will gain a lot more as they have their presence around the Middle East. And that means that people are giving them support. And here, with all our money and effort and promises, we can't get anybody to do the fighting. If they get our weapons, they drop them. Right now, open alliance with Assad, with Al-Qaeda, does that mean that someday they might be used against us? ISIS ended up with our weapons, so this might just, enable the enemy to have more weapons of ours.
Well, I think the neocons consider themselves the intellectual elite, and the average American is just a dumb kook. So I'm guessing that they're hoping that the Americans are going to forget that it was Al-Qaeda that attacked the U.S. in 2001.
I think we declared war against them. But Al-Qaeda is using softer language. There's no doubt about it. I think it's a ploy, because they say they're nationalists. They just want to deal with an issue. If they're from Syria, they just want to deal with Syria, where ISIS is international and it's a caliphate and this sort of thing. So they're the good guys, although they try to prove they're just as ruthless. They don't want to be softies. So if they argue on who's the most ruthless, Al-Qaeda will try to show that they're just as ruthless as ISIS. But the one thing that came out in some of these articles recently is, why do these groups, although they are against each other, their goal, they've unified to get rid of Assad. And the one thing that they said that unified them is they're unified against American aggression. And of course, how many Americans today would stand up and say, yeah, American government and American people have endorsed an aggressive program? Well, you can lose points on that. If you're in politics, it can be rather risky, and it sounds like you're un-American, and it just is, you don't say that. But the truth is those individuals who join ISIS, they might not agree with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. They might go with anything, not that is anything that's against Assad as much as anything that's against America. Yeah. And this is why I think this is so foolish. Of course, the neocons, there might be some neocons. If our friend Bill Crystal all of a sudden arrived here, he'd say, Ron, you are making a point there. But if you'd listened to us, we'd have had lots of troops in there. Yeah. And he has more allies in the Senate now. He has this Tom Cotton, and who knows? Lindsey Graham's running for president. I hope he's not even as successful as John McCain. But this whole thing doesn't make any sense until they change policy.
Sure, and this is why the neocons, whenever the policy of theirs goes awry, they need us to double down. You didn't do it hard enough. We blew Libya to pieces. It's an absolute disaster. It was all on the advice of the neocons and the liberal interventionists, and now, well, it's our fault because we didn't occupy them. So that's always the way they have out.
The other factor in here is a little more difficult to completely understand, because they're not mentioned as much, but it's the position that the Turks have right now, because I think they want to get rid of Assad as well. Oh, yeah. And therefore, but there was a hint in some news that Turks may be concerned enough that they will be more overt and send in troops not that they haven't had some involvement already, but they have a concern about the Kurds. You know, they're not interested in the Kurds having a Kurdistan.
And this is where you have the curlicues of U.S. policy, because on one hand, the U.S. has had to help the Kurds in Iraq. It's the only way to keep ISIS from taking northern Iraq, but that's emboldened the Kurds to envision a state that encompasses, you know, current existing states. And so that's a red line for Turkey. So Turkey, I think, is massing troops on the border. It may try to kill two birds with one stone and have a no-fly zone for Assad as well.
But even our position with helping the Kurds contradicts our spoken policy with Iraq.
Yeah.
It was to be held unified. Instead of allowing self-determination, allowing the people to have their own countries, make their own decisions, keep the outside forces out, and the Europeans should be out of it, the Americans should be out of it. Yes, there would be chaos. But, you know, the outsiders have been meddling in that region because there's oil. I think that's the biggest motivation, because of oil and trade routes and a few other things, and they've been very much involved. And Israel, of course, is an issue too. We have been involved. And since World War I mean, it just seems like the basic principle ought to be self-determination. And those words have been spoken many times. You know, Woodrow Wilson said some nice things about everybody has a right to self-determination. But you know, probably by now, if we'd have just walked away from Iraq, you'd have the Kurds in the north. You'd have a section that were basically Sunnis, and the Shia would have the other. But then they'd argue and fight over the oil. You see, that would be another issue too.
Yeah, but they'd have to find a way to trade with each other and live with each other. It's the outside influence, the weapons, the money, the masters of the universe feel that the U.S. interventionists have that light fuel to the fire.
Right. If they play ball with us, we give them the money. If they don't play ball, they are our enemy, and then we bomb them. You know, that's my complaint, that we only have two choices in foreign policy. And I would say that we should talk about the third one, which is in our best interest, which is in the best interest of peace, and that is non-interventionism. Willingness to talk to people like this, and you know, if they do get halfway organized, make sure that we can trade and travel there. But we're not on the verge of this, because I think too many people see this as tactical. There's too much control by the neocons in the media and in our government. And right now, I think for a while they're going to be talking about silly things like this. Well, right now, what we have to do is save Al-Qaeda, because they're weakened a little bit, and we want to give them a boost because they're better than the ISIS is. So we'll have to wait and see, but I believe that the problems are going to be there for a while. And of course, so often I have predicted that this will probably end when our country goes bankrupt. And you know, now that we have over $2 trillion of unfunded liabilities, who knows? Our financial situation might not be much better than some of these other countries, and therefore that may come, the bankruptcy, which is essentially was part of the problem with the downfall of the Soviet system. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.